Peach brown rot is probably one of the most destructive diseases that we deal with whenever you're growing any kind of a stone fruit. Peaches, apricots, cherries, pluots, plum, doesn't matter. Anywhere where you can grow these things, brown rot is your number one enemy. So in today's video, we're going to talk about what to do, when to do it, and why you're doing it to knock this disease out of your orchard so you can start to enjoy the fruits of your labor. Alright, brown rot of peaches and other stone fruits. If you clicked on this link, then you've probably experienced it yourself and you're hoping to figure out how to control it. So what is brown rot? Brown rot is simply a fungus. It's Monolinea fructicola. That's the American, United States born and bred native version of brown rot, and then quite a few years back the Europeans decided they were going to share their version of brown rot with us, and that's Monolinea laxa. Fortunately, we can kind of throw both of them in the same bucket because they're pretty similar and you control both of them the same way. Disclaimer, if throughout this video, if you hear me say monolinea, I mean brown rot. Sometimes I just use that terminology, and when I get talking it might come out. So if I say monolinea throughout the course of this video, I'm referring to brown rot. Brown rot infections are going to start from spores that are left over from the previous year's infection. Okay, things like the mummies that are hanging on the trees, the old dried up fruits, and sometimes they even just look like a pit. All the old fruits and pits that lay on the ground in the springtime, some of the leaves, those are going to hold the spores of the fungus through the winter and into the springtime. And then when the right weather conditions come, which is usually going to be early spring, when you start getting warm temperatures, when things are just starting to wake up a little bit, 50, 55 degrees, something like that, and you get some rain, all those spores that's on that infected debris are going to pop back up with that moisture, and they're going to reinfect your tree and get the cycle started for the upcoming growing season. So if you understand that, then you can understand how important it could be to put in place what we call cultural controls. If you've watched any of my videos, you know I am a very strong advocate of cultural controls, especially when it comes to any kind of disease issue that you might be having. Cleaning up all that junk, cleaning up the fallen fruit. A lot of times it'll just look like pits on the ground because the fruit will just decompose and the pits are left. Clean all that stuff up, either late in the fall or early in the spring. Okay, and get all that stuff cleaned up and get it out. Throw it in bags, put it in your trash. Let the garbage man take it away from you, get it off your property. Because that's going to just be full of inoculum. It's going to want to reinfect your trees in the springtime. Proper pruning. Thinning out your peach trees to a nice open center so that they've got good air circulation and good sunlight penetration. All these things can help to reduce the ability of those disease spores to actually infect your trees. You can prune peach trees really aggressively, and typically you're still going to get more fruit than you could ever eat off of a well-maintained peach tree. Keeping your trees healthy, just in general, a healthy tree is always going to be less prone to being heavily infected by a disease and even sometimes insect issues than a tree that is sickly, than a tree that is not at 100% health, not vigorous, So you want to make sure, like if it's a younger tree, you certainly want to make sure that they're getting watered properly, fertilized properly. A good thick layer of mulch can really help to improve your soil quality so that the tree can benefit from that as well. All these things play a part in trying to reduce the disease pressures and try to create a situation where the pesticides, the fungicides that you're going to be using to control this thing don't have to work so hard. Now, monolinea is a bit of a opportunistic pest, pathogen if you would. They do their best if they have an opportunity to infect your trees. And what I mean by that is a break in the bark, a crack in the skin of your peach, or an open flower petal. Believe it or not, those open flower petals become an entry point for that pathogen to get in, and when they get in that way, they can actually cause a lot of damage. And we're going to talk a little more about that in just a minute. So keeping your trees healthy and keeping them strong is going to help to eliminate a lot of your opportunities for this disease to really take hold in your trees. Okay, so now let's talk about spraying. This is going to get a little bit involved because whenever it comes to spraying in the use of pesticides, fungicides in this case, sometimes the devil is in the details. And so I'm going to explain this in full detail so that you understand how these things work and what you're looking to achieve so that you can make the right decisions for your trees on your property as you need to. We're going to start early in the spring. One of the biggest mistakes people make is they don't get their sprays out early enough. These spores are going to pop up very early in the season and start infecting your tree. What I would recommend is before your trees even leaf out, when the winter is just starting to walk away and spring is just starting to roll in and things are starting to warm up a little bit, the first thing that I would recommend is an application of copper. And you're going to be doing this before the tree even has any leaves on it or any flower buds, when it's still dormant. We call this a dormant season application. You want to use some copper, and you can mix some horticultural oil in with it. The horticultural oil will help if you happen to have any scale insects or spider mite issues, but as far as with the copper goes, it's actually an adjuvant. It can help to stick the copper onto the tree. Now what this will do is, this will, if there's any spores of that brown rot that are hanging out in the crevices and the bark of your tree and things like that, it will help to subdue them. It will knock them back a little bit. It'll make them a little less capable of infecting and spreading on your tree. And the other thing it will do is it will help reduce the potential for peach leaf curl. Peach leaf curl is a very early season spray. And now peach leaf curl doesn't really have anything directly to do with brown rot. But if you get peach leaf curl, and if you've ever experienced it, you know the leaves get all twisted up and curled over, and they'll fall off. They'll end up falling off of the tree, after a month or two. And what all that does is, again, it weakens the tree. Now the tree doesn't have these nice big green leaves that it can use to photosynthesize. When those leaves fall off of the tree, now it has to use some of its energy to produce new leaves so that they can start to photosynthesize. It just weakens the tree, and anything you can do to keep your tree healthy is going to help reduce the opportunity for the brown rot fungus to really come in and destroy your crop. So a copper spray early in the season, as soon as things are starting to warm up, can help in both of those regards. Now we're going to talk about brown rot itself. Now we're going to start talking about focusing on spray applications geared towards keeping the brown rot off of your trees. I've mentioned this in a couple of my other videos, and if you've watched those videos and I sound redundant, I apologize, but this really needs to be said, and a lot of people don't understand this. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make. 99% of the fungicides that are out on the market today, they work preventatively. And what I mean by that is you spray them on the tree and they give the tree a protective coating so that when those fungal spores come up and try to get onto your tree, they cannot. Okay? Now, understanding that those fungal spores are going to activate when you have the right temperatures, 55 degrees, and rainfall. That's what's going to make those spores jump up onto your tree, is that moisture, that humidity, that rainfall. Okay? Understanding that, you want to get your preventative fungicide sprays on your tree before the rain comes, a day before, 2 days before, whatever. A lot of people make this mistake. They go, oh, it's going to rain out tomorrow, so it's stupid for me to spray now because it's going to rain tomorrow and it's going to wash all the fungicide off my tree. I'll wait until after it rains and then I'll apply the fungicide. Well, you blew it. Okay? Most of these fungicides, 99% of them, they are not curative. They are not going to kill or stop fungal spores or fungal infections that are already on your tree. You have to get them on before the rain comes so that you can protect your tree from those spores. So if you get your copper sprays in place early, the next time that you really want to be thinking about brown rot now is when those trees are in what we call pink or popcorn. Usually with stone fruits they call it the popcorn stage. Apple trees they call it the pink stage. And what that is that's the little flower buds. You get those little flower buds that are all coated up and down the stems. They're not opened up yet. They're not actually flowers. They're just the buds. When you start getting into that point, you are getting into brown rot time. And that's when you want to start your sprays. Now, as far as what I would recommend for sprays for those earlier season is Daconil. It's typically called Daconil. It's the most common trade name for it. The chemical name is called chlorothalonil. CHLOR, like chlorine, chlorothalonil. If you buy it at a nursery or a big box store or hardware store or something, the Bonide brand is called Fungonil. Fungonil. If you look at the active ingredient on that bottle, it'll say chlorothalonil. It's the same thing. Quite often it's called Daconil, Fungonil. If you're in more of a commercial world, like if you have a lot of trees and you want to buy big 2.5 gallon jugs of it, it goes by the name Bravo. All the same stuff. Okay, chlorothalonil is a really good fungicide. It works well against brown rot. It has some limitations. Then the limitations that it has is the time and the amount that you can put on your tree. I'm assuming every chlorothalonil or Daconil label is going to say specifically on it, do not apply after what we call shuck split. Okay, shuck split happens just after the flowers fall off. So you only have a small window early in the season when you can apply this chlorothalonil. And you should, because it's a very good product. And that is the time frame when you are most prone to get hit with this brown rot because of all those spores coming up in the spring. So you want to spray your trees at the popcorn stage when they're little pink buds with the Daconil. Now these products will protect your tree for about 2 weeks, okay, maybe a little bit less. So once you get that first spray on there, you're going to start watching the weather. Maybe you wait 8 or 10 days, and then you're watching the weather. When's the next rain event going to come? Oh, well, if it's going to rain out on Wednesday, then you want to get out there on Tuesday, the day before, and you want to spray it again. You want to get that spray on before that rain comes. This is the part that most people get wrong. They don't understand this. And you're going to do that, continue to do that up until shuck split. Well, what happens when my tree's in flower? I got my peach tree and it's got all these pretty little pink. Yeah, spray it when it's in flower. Okay, normally I try to avoid spraying trees in flower all the time, specifically for the case of honeybees. You don't want to hurt your honeybees, I understand that. 2 things here. Studies have been done time and time again that show that just a straight fungicide with no insecticide in it, which is what chlorothalonil is, it's strictly a fungicide, have very little impact on honeybee populations. And the second thing is that, remember I said brown rot is an opportunistic fungus, and those open flower petals create a beautiful opening for those fungal spores to get inside and infect your tree, and they will rot that whole, they call blossom rot. The whole flower will just rot right out. That stuff will travel right down the stem into the twig, and it can cause cankers in the actual twig of the peach tree, and now you can actually have this Monilinia inside your tree, actually traveling systemically inside your tree, which is a horrible situation. So you really want to try to get at least one good spray on your trees when they are in flower. If you want to be a little extra cautious with the bees, do it in the early evening when the bees aren't active. If you get a cooler night, usually when it's cooler out, the bees aren't going to be so active. You go out just before the sun goes down if you have some time and spray, earlier in the early evening, and you should be fine. You shouldn't have a problem with the bees. I work on an orchard. We have bees there. I talk to the beekeeper all the time. It's been 7 years now I've been on that property. Never has he had an issue with me, with the honeybees, with the fungicide application on the peach trees. We've never had an issue. And that is a very important time to get that protectant spray on there, is when they're in flower. Now, shortly after they flower, when the flower petals start to fall off, that's what we call petal fall. And that is another very important time to get a spray application out. Because once petal fall starts, now you're starting to actually create fruit. Okay, you're going to have teeny tiny little peaches on there. Typically, petal fall is considered when about 75 to 80% of your flower petals have fallen off of the tree. So you'll still have a few flowers hanging around, but most of them are gone. That's petal fall. You want to get out there, you want to spray again. The next stage of development for a peach tree is what we call shuck split. When peaches first start, and if you grow peaches, you may have seen this, you might be familiar with what I'm talking about. When peaches are very small and they're just starting out, you've got your little peach hanging off of your tree, and they're tiny, they're very, very small. And you've got this little brown, like a husk, they call it a shuck. It's a little papery brown thing that kind of covers it like this. And as that peach grows, that shuck kind of breaks open and falls, and eventually it falls off. In fact, a lot of times I can go out there, you can kind of pull them off with your fingers, you know. When those shucks are just starting to come off and fall off of your peaches, that's called shuck split. And you definitely want to get another spray out then, and you want to use your Daconil again, because that's the end of your window for using Daconil. After that, you can no longer use Daconil by label. You know, and always follow the label. Since we're here, here's my disclaimer: always follow the label on your pesticides. It's the law. Don't just listen to me or anybody else. Read the label, follow what it says. Different states can have different rules and different laws and different labels. The label is the law. Now, once you get past that shuck split stage, you can no longer use chlorothalonil by label. And now you're getting into what we call cover sprays. If you've heard people use these lingos before, I'll run you through it real quick. As a peach tree is developing, we do the same thing with apple trees. They have developmental stages that we often refer to, especially in the spraying world. Okay, popcorn is the bud, and then you have your flower stage, and then you have your petal fall stage, then you have your shuck split stage. Okay. So those are used as kind of tools to talk about spraying. And then you might hear people talking about cover sprays. First cover, second cover, third cover. Those are all the sprays that come after that, when it's just a matter of when the peaches are just growing on in size. Okay, first cover would come right after shuck split, second cover, third cover, etc. Okay, just so you know, in case you hear people talking about that, you know what they're talking about. Now, after the shuck split spray, now you're getting into your cover sprays. First, you can no longer use chlorothalonil. I would definitely recommend at least a first cover spray, which would come, again, you're going to follow that 2-week rule. Okay, you get your shuck split spray out there. Assume that that's going to give you about 2 weeks of control. So you're watching the weather, and the next time a rain event comes up, you want to get another spray on those trees before that rain comes. And for that spray, as far as what's readily available and easy to use, I would recommend propiconazole. And over the counter, if you look like Bonide, the company Bonide, again, they call it Infuse, I-N-F-U-S-E, and the active ingredient in that is propiconazole. You can use that for your first cover spray. Okay, and kind of backtracking here, once you start getting into like your shuck split and your first cover spray, you're probably going to want to start thinking about incorporating an insecticide too, because that's when some of your insects, when those peaches are tiny, some of your insects like your plum curculio are coming in and are going after them. That'll be another video. I'll put another video out where we'll talk about dealing with the insecticide of working on peach trees and stone fruits. But for that first cover spray after the shuck split, Bonide Infuse, if you look at the label, it should say propiconazole as an active ingredient, and again, follow the label, get that spray in. Now, I know this sounds like a lot. You're like, wow, that's an awful lot of spraying, and it is. The problem is that brown rot is so persistent that you really sometimes have to be aggressive about it just to get it in check. Once you get that first cover in, you can probably back off a little bit. Peach trees, once they start actually developing fruit, when these fruits are starting to get to be, you know, the size of a marble or a little bit bigger, and they start growing, it becomes less of a problem, because the bulk of your attack from those brown rot fungus spores is going to come earlier in the springtime. So your disease pressures have declined a little bit, And those peaches with all that fuzz on them, they've got a kind of a little bit of a nice line of defense there themselves. And you can back off on your spraying a little bit. But here's the thing now, once you get into that point, now you're getting, into the point where you've got fruit on your tree, you really want to start thinking about thinning your peaches. It's so important to thin your peaches out. Peaches will grow so many fruit that they will snap limbs. And if you have peaches that are so close together that they're banging against each other and rubbing against each other, okay, if they're growing and there's another branch coming out the side and it's smashed up against that branch when the wind blows and they're rubbing, it's going to break that skin on that peach. And when it breaks that skin on that peach, you've just created an opportunity for your opportunistic fungus, brown rot, to get into that peach, sometimes when it typically wouldn't, because it doesn't have that protective fuzzy coating on it anymore. Okay, so sometimes you can kind of ride through the summer. You're going to spend your summer thinking more about thinning your fruit, watering your trees if they need it, okay, maybe thinning out some branches. If you start getting a lot of heavy foliage growth through the middle of the tree, you might want to thin some of those out so you get good sunlight penetration. Those are the things that I'm usually focusing on through the middle of the growing season, more so than continuing with my sprays. I'm just working on keeping the trees healthy, keeping the fruits, individualized so they're not getting broken open, and just trying to keep everything nice. Now, there's another opportunity, and this is the killer. This is the worst. Brown rot can ravage your crops in the fall, and you see this so many times. You can go through the whole season and be like, wow, my peaches look great, this is wonderful. And then a week before you're ready to harvest, you go out there and your peaches are just covered in brown rot. They're nasty, they smell, if you touch them, you see the powder, the spores are just coming off of them. And the battery just died on my phone. So it's now the next day. We're back again. Alright, so coming into the harvest season, quite often that's when brown rot will come in and just ravage your crops. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Part of it is that your cover sprays are starting to lighten off. They're not going to be as effective as they were. Part of it is that at this point in time, peaches are starting to establish large amounts of sugars. That's what makes them sweet. And sugar also is a petri dish for fungal growth. It's also the time of year that birds discover that your peaches are soft and juicy and sweet, and so do bees. And herein sometimes lies the problem. What I find often will happen is that you will get a bird that will come in. I'm sure if you raise peaches, you've seen this. A bird will come in and peck a few holes in your peaches here, and he might pick another peach and peck a few holes in that one. They always manage to damage 3 or 4 instead of just eating one. And when you make that opening in that peach, when you break that skin, now what you have left behind is that nice, moist, sweet internal peach flesh. And if there's any brown rot spores that are still hanging around on your peaches, if they get into that area, it's like a petri dish for them. They can land in there and they can grow and they can spread very quickly. And then once that happens, now once again you have massively increased your disease pressure throughout your entire tree or your entire orchard. So there's a couple of things that we can do to try to help avoid that. One thing you could do is a late season spray. And for the late season spray, what I would recommend is myclobutanil. It goes by the name Immunox. Spectracide is the brand. And Immunox is the name of the fungicide, and it contains the active ingredient myclobutanil. And the thing that's nice about that is it has only a 7-day, what we call pre-harvest interval, or days to harvest interval. And what that is the time span between when you can spray and when you can harvest. And 7 days is a pretty light days to harvest interval for a fungicide. So when it gets to the point where you think you're almost ready to start picking your peaches, you're like, oh, maybe next week or a week and a half or so we're gonna be able to start harvesting, you might want to go out and give your trees a spray with this myclobutanil, this Immunox. And one of the things that's nice about Immunox in particular is that, remember I said 99% of fungicides are strictly protective. Immunox is to some degree part of the 1%. They actually do have what we call a kickback effect. They have the ability to actually kill off some fungal spores, and they provide protection. They're both. And so a late season spray of that, 10 days, 2 weeks, whatever, before you think you're going to be harvesting, you might be able to kick off some of those spores that are on your peaches and also give them some additional protection for those last couple of weeks before you harvest. Another thing that you can do that I would strongly recommend, now hopefully if you've done a proper job of thinning your peaches, you're not going to have a lot of peaches rubbing together and breaking open and opening up that skin to create that petri dish effect. Keep an eye out on your peaches. If you find peaches on your trees that have been pecked by birds, you want to get those peaches off of your tree and out of there. If you find peaches that have rubbed together on branches and are broken open, you want to get those peaches out of there and get rid of them, because again, it creates that petri dish effect that can very rapidly explode the population of brown rot fungus within your environment. One way that I've discovered that can help to kind of monitor for broken flesh is look for bees. If you have a peach that has a broken skin on it and that inner flesh is exposed, the bees will find that, and they'll find it pretty quick. So if you go walking through your orchard and you're looking around, you're checking out your peaches, you're getting ready to harvest, and all of a sudden you see a peach one over here somewhere and it's got a ton of bees around it, flying around, buzzing around, you might want to check that peach out, because that one might have a broken skin on it. So you can go over there, and if there's only a couple of bees and it's not that big of a deal, you might be able to just go in there and pull it off. You might, if there's because I've seen them swarm. I've seen the bees like swarm on a broken peach. You might have to wait until it gets later in the evening when the bees go home, and then you can go out there and get that peach off of there and get rid of it. Because all it takes is a couple of these bad peaches, these broken peaches, and like I said, the brown rot will find it and get in there, and it will very rapidly increase, and then you've just created a whole nother disease pressure situation within your orchard that would be better off if you could avoid it. Now keep in mind, in your specific situation, everybody's environment is different, okay? Everybody's got a different situation when it comes to brown rot, and there's a ton of variables that come into play, like the amount of rainfall you have, the variety of peach trees that you're growing, or whatever they are, plums or pluots. Some are going to be more prone to brown rot, some are going to be less prone. Weather conditions can make the problem worse or better. Depending on your specific situation, hopefully now that you kind of understand the whole deal with this, keep in mind that you can adjust your spray program. If you have a very small problem with brown rot, you may not need to spray quite so much. You might be able to skip the shuck split spray, or you might be able to skip the early season spray. If you have a real bad situation with brown rot and it's just been devastating your crop for years, you might want to run more than one cover spray. You might want to run a couple of cover sprays later on into the season and kind of see how it does, feel it out. Like, oh, this is great. We have no problems this year. Next year maybe we can cut it back a little bit. Or if you run into a problem, you might say, oh, next year we should maybe be a little more aggressive with this thing. And you might also find that, like, let's say if you've had consistent issues with brown rot, okay, and again, that's usually because you have heavy disease pressure. If you go for a couple of seasons and you really focus on your cultural controls, get those in place, you put a good solid spray program in place, year after year after year, you're going to start minimalizing that disease pressure, because every year there's going to be less and less active spores that can reinfest your tree. So you might find, even if you have a really bad problem with brown rot, if you're very aggressive against handling it for a couple of years and getting your trees healthy, you might find that after a year or two, you might be able to start easing back a little bit because you've reduced those disease pressures to the point where it's not as big of a deal. And all these things come into play, and that's why I really like to do a deep dive on these, because I want you to understand how all of this works so that you can make adjustments for your property, because everyone's property is going to be a little bit different. All right? So at this point, the thing that you really want to start thinking about is hitting that like button so we can get this video out to other people that might need it, and focus on growing your trees. And I hope this video helped. I hope that you guys have an awesome, productive season, and I hope all the things that I talked about today just made sense.